Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first ever episode of the Big Bad Brad Show, the MMA edition. My name is Brad Williams, and with this show, I'm going to aim to provide news and views from the sport of mixed martial arts from way up the back in the cheap seats. I'm not a fighter. I've never claimed to be a fighter. I'm just someone who bloody loves the sport of MMA, and I really think you should too, because it is the greatest sport on the planet Earth. Every week, we are going to take a look back. Well, week-ish. I say every week, but, you never know what's going to pop up. But every week-ish, we're going to take a look at some of the big stories breaking in MMA. We're going to look forward to events that are on the horizon and, just give you a fan's eye view of everything that is the sport of MMA. And in this week's episode, the inaugural episode of the Big Bad Brad Show, the MMA edition, we're going to take a look back at the epicness that was UFC 196, Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz. As of the recording of this show, the fight went down 1 week ago, and still, it seems like it's all anybody is talking about. This fight has taken Nate Diaz to an entire other level as far as popularity goes. He was already a popular fighter amongst diehard fans, but this has really thrown him into the mainstream stratosphere. He is a superstar, the likes of which he probably never anticipated becoming in his MMA career, and good on him too, because he's got such a fan-friendly style, and as I say, diehard fans have loved Nate Diaz for years, and now people who've never seen the UFC before are getting an opportunity to see what he's all about, and that can only be a good thing. From all accounts, he made a big fat paycheck for UFC 196, as he should, took the fight on 11 days' notice and came in and pulled off the upset. It was... A lot of people have called it one of the biggest upsets in MMA. Fox Sports Australia actually put up an article that called it one of the biggest upsets in the history of the UFC. And I think when you look at things objectively, I don't think it was that at all. I think people that know MMA and understand MMA saw Nate Diaz winning that fight. I'm not going to sit here and say that I definitely knew he would win, but I certainly thought there was a chance that he could. There was so much, that was unknown heading into that fight. I mean, you've got Conor taking the fight on 11 days' notice as well. He knew he was fighting, he just didn't know that it was going to be Nate Diaz. The fight was at welterweight, which is, 25 pounds heavier than featherweight, 15 pounds heavier than lightweight, where Conor thought he was going to be fighting. Conor had never fought at welterweight in the UFC. Nate hadn't fought at welterweight in years. And there was just so much. There was so much that could have... thrown a spanner in the works as far as the outcome of that fight. I mean, you saw it in the first round. Conor was cracking Nate with big shots, and I believe shots that would have put down a featherweight. And you can't discount that the difference in weight and the difference in size makes a difference in someone's ability to take a shot. And Nate took everything Conor had, and in typical Nate Diaz fashion, he told him to keep coming and keep those big shots coming, and he was able to eat them, and he was able to implement his game plan, and he got the finish in the second round. And it was such a great fight to watch, and the excitement leading up to that fight, again, on 11 days' notice, was just incredible. There were people that have never seen a UFC fight in their lives were messaging me about that fight leading up to it, going, oh man, this Conor McGregor-Nate Diaz fight, this is going to be amazing, I can't wait to watch it. I had mates come around and watch it, and I had a friend of mine who's never seen a UFC event before in his life that was just on the edge of his seat. He couldn't believe what he was watching. Between that and the Miesha Tate Holly Holm fight, which we'll get to in a minute, it was a great example of everything that makes MMA so unbelievable. And the outcome of that fight was just amazing. I think, it's going to make Nate a bigger star than he's ever been. I don't think it's going to hurt Conor McGregor. I think you can really look at it and say, he's taken the BJ Penn approach. He's prepared to fight anywhere, anytime, any place. And sometimes that pays off and sometimes it doesn't. And I think Conor, you've seen in the post-fight sort of reaction from Conor, he's been very humble, very congratulatory to Nate, and he just sees it as a learning experience. It was a fight that he took because he loves to fight, and he knew he was going to make a payday for it, and from all accounts, what a payday it was, and rightfully so. There were so many people that would have had eyeballs on that fight for no reason other than the fact that it was a Conor McGregor fight. So every cent he made for that fight, he earned. And Conor will be fine. It's not like he's going to drop off the planet. It's not the end of his career, far from it. I mean, it's probably made him a bigger name than he even was leading into the fight, if that was possible. I think it was just such a win-win. I mean, sometimes fights don't have to be for belts, and they don't need to be for contendership, and they don't need to be grudge matches. Sometimes fights can just be fights because they're fun, and I think that's exactly what the main event of UFC 196 was. It was two guys fighting because they like to fight, and we the fans were the beneficiaries. It was unbelievable. In the wash-up from UFC 196, the rumours have already started to fly thick and fast as to who the next fights will be for both Conor McGregor and for Nate Diaz. Rumours circulating at the moment would suggest that Conor's next fight will be a defence of his UFC featherweight title against Frankie Edgar, who, I mean, fair dinkum. If he wasn't next in line for a title shot, if he'd burnt the place down, no one could have blamed him. So it looks like Frankie Edgar will get his long-awaited shot at the featherweight title. Rumours are circulating that it will be at UFC 200, which is looking like being just a gigantic event. It's going to be absolutely amazing. I'm hoping to be there myself. Rumours are circulating that I've started this podcast so that I can write my flights and accommodation off on tax. If it happens, it happens. Let's just put it that way. But no, I really am excited about UFC 200 and really hope that I can get to Las Vegas for that event because it will be just an amazing thing to be a part of. For Nate Diaz, the rumours are also circulating that he has a big fight on the horizon. Two names that have been thrown up as possible opponents are Robbie Lawler, the UFC welterweight champion, and also a returning George St. Pierre, the former UFC welterweight champion of the world and arguably one of the greatest fighters of all time, if not the greatest. That would be an amazing fight. I don't know if Nate Diaz plans to stay at welterweight. I don't think he will. There was a reason that he left welterweight before. He had mixed results there, and I think lightweight is where he looks his best. The Michael Johnson fight was unreal. It was as good a Nate Diaz as we've ever seen. I would like to see him get into lightweight, and I would really have no problems at all with him getting the next crack at Rafael dos Anjos, who was Conor McGregor's original opponent at UFC 196. I think that should be the next fight for Nate, but if he was to fight either Robbie Lawler or George St. Pierre, I would be there with bells on. I think either of those fights would be amazing. And Nate Diaz is just a fighter's fighter. He's a fan-friendly fighter. People love him for his willingness to fight anyone. And either of those fights would just be amazing. So whatever's next for Nate Diaz, there will be a lot more eyeballs on him than there were prior to the Conor McGregor fight. And I think that is just fantastic for a guy who's been great for the sport in the cage and very good at generating interest, I should say, outside of the cage. The future looks bright for Nate Diaz, whatever he decides to do next. The other big fight to come out of UFC 196 was the UFC Women's Bantamweight Championship. The now former champion Holly Holm defending her title against Miesha Tate. And what a great fight it was. I mean, Holly Holm came out in the first round, looked unreal. Miesha Tate came back strong in the second round and really dominated Holly Holm and almost got the finish on the ground. Then the next two fights, it looked like it was going to be Holly just cruising to a decision. And then in the fifth round, Miesha Tate, with all the heart and guts of a champion, came and just pulled the rear naked choke submission victory out of nowhere. She never gave up. She never stopped believing that she could win the fight. And with minutes left on the clock, she was able to pull off the finish. And Miesha Tate is now the new UFC Bantamweight champion of the world. News out of that fight is that Miesha Tate's first title defense will be against Ronda Rousey. I just don't know how interested I am in seeing that fight. For me, Ronda Rousey getting the next title shot's a bit like a dog shitting on your lawn. I mean, you might be aware that it's happening, but you're not really that keen to watch it. I don't think Ronda being dominated by Holly Holm and then getting a face kicked off should really warrant her getting a shot at the title in her first fight back from her hiatus. And I know that these days, title fights, the criteria is pretty relaxed. We've seen guys, look at Alexander Gustafsson, got a UFC light heavyweight title fight coming off a loss. We saw Chael Sonnen challenge John Jones for a title that he wasn't even for a division he wasn't even a competitor in. But for me, I would be much more excited to see Holly Holm get a rematch against Miesha Tate. If that wasn't the case, if that wasn't where the UFC was leaning, I really would think that the next person in line should be Amanda Nunes. She's got a 3-fight win streak. She's won 5 of her last 6. Her only loss was to former title challenger Kat Zingano. And I think that if it was me, in a perfect world, if I was booking for the UFC, I would have Amanda Nunes challenge Miesha Tate for the title, and I would have the Holly Holm Ronda Rousey rematch to determine the number one contender to then be the next challenger for that belt. I think both of those fights are the fights that should be made, but it's not really up to me. And if it was, I'm sure I'd get it wrong. But Miesha Tate, fantastic performance, and congratulations on that UFC title win. It was just amazing to watch, and Miesha Tate's been such a fan favourite for a long time. She was the former Strikeforce champ, and not only is she just such a gutsy, competitor. She also just seems like a really nice girl. So for her to get the win was just fantastic. Big news for us Aussie fight fans. The next time the UFC is in the Octagon, it will be down under. UFC Fight Night Brisbane. Mark Hunt versus Frank Mir. I'm going to be there, and I'm absolutely pumped for that card. It is 1 week from today as of the recording of this episode, and I just cannot wait. Anytime the UFC comes to Australia, I'm there with bells on. This is my 11th UFC event live overall. I've been to every event that's ever been in Australia. I've even been to a couple in Vegas. Was lucky enough to get over there, and I just cannot wait. It's such a great card. So many Aussie fighters being showcased on the card. Richie Walsh is on the card. Dan Kelly's on the card. Jake Matthews, who is such an exciting prospect, is going to be taking on Johnny Case. The co-main event sees a returning Hector Lombard taking on Neil Magny in a very, very important fight in the UFC welterweight division. And then, as I say, the main event, the Super Samoan Mark Hunt taking on two-time UFC heavyweight champion Frank Mir. I think a win in the main event for Mark Hunt really, really puts him in the mix as far as a shot at the UFC heavyweight championship. I would say that the next challenger for the belt will most likely be Ben Rothwell, if he's victorious in his next fight, or Alistair Overeem if he can get past Andrei Arlovski. So for Mark Hunt, I would think that a win in this fight would probably put him one win away from a crack at the winner of Fabricio Verdum and Stipe Miocic. Obviously, his last loss was to Stipe Miocic at UFC Fight Night Adelaide. Mark Hunt himself has said that he really came into that fight underprepared, and it's really lit a fire under him, and that's what we saw in the second fight with Bigfoot in Melbourne, was just a rejuvenated Mark Hunt who looked fit and ready to rip and tear, and just came in and demolished Bigfoot in the first round. I would really love to see Mark Hunt fight either Stipe Miocic or Fabricio Verdum. Remember, it was the fight for the UFC heavyweight interim championship that Mark Hunt took on Fabricio Verdum in less than 2 weeks' notice and came in and really was dominating Fabricio Verdum in that first round. Just looked unreal. It really looked like he was on his way to winning that interim heavyweight championship. Got caught with an absolutely beautiful flying knee in the second round that just cleaned his clock, and it happens, fighters get caught all the time, and Fabricio Verdum picked up the victory. I know Mark Hunt would love to get another crack at that belt, and he'd probably love to get another crack at Stipe Miocic if Stipe can get past Fabricio Verdum in Brazil. I think, any opportunity to see Mark Hunt fight for a UFC title would be a huge deal in Australia, which is his adopted home, and also back in New Zealand. And he's just such a great fighter to watch. He's just explosive, and it's a phenomenal experience. I'll never ever forget being in Brisbane for his first fight with Bigfoot Silva. That was just the most amazing thing I've ever been a part of. I mean, I'm also a long-time boxing fan. I was in Sydney the night Danny Green knocked out Roy Jones Jr. I was down in Melbourne when Holly Holm knocked out Ronda Rousey, and I have never experienced anything live like Mark Hunt and Bigfoot Silva. That was just two guys going balls to the wall for 5 rounds, and at the end of it, neither of them had anything left to give, and it still gives me goosebumps now talking about it. It was just an amazing thing to be a part of, and Mark Hunt, just an amazing fighter, and I really, really hope that he'll be a UFC heavyweight champion before it's all said and done. As I say, in the co-main event, Hector Lombard returning from an athletic commission appointed holiday for he's been serving a ban suspension, I should say, for a banned substance. He'll make his return against surging welterweight Neil Magny, who's looked unreal in recent times. He suffered a setback, I believe it was against Damian Maia, and then since then he's just looked unreal, and this is such a great stylistic matchup, and as I say, a very important one in the UFC's welterweight division. Either one of these guys could lay claim to being the next in line for a title shot with a win. It's a very important fight for Hector, with it being his first fight back, to show that he hasn't lost a step as being the guy that was the monster in the UFC before his little holiday, and it's a chance for Neil Magny to keep the good times rolling. He's had he's on a 2-fight win streak at the moment. He's got wins over Eric Silva and over Kelvin Gastelum, and as I say, a victory over Hector Lombard would really put him in the conversation for being one of the next in line for a UFC welterweight title fight. Also on the card, we've got what I think could be the sleeper for fight of the night in Aussie prospect Jake Matthews taking on Johnny Case. Jake Matthews is such a prospect. He's such an exciting fighter to watch. He's still so young. I believe he's still only 22 years old, and I really do think that he is Australia's best chance of having a homegrown UFC champion. I know Rob Whittaker is surging in the middleweight division, I should say. But, the Kiwi fans are pretty quick to remind you he wasn't born in Australia, he's born in New Zealand, he just lives here. So I really do think Jake Matthews could one day be the first ever UFC champion from Australia, and that's just such an exciting thing to watch his journey. His only setback was his loss to James Vick in Adelaide in a fight that he was winning, and he just got a bit distracted with the everything surrounding the fight and the hype behind him, and he was able to bring it back with a win at UFC 193 in Melbourne, and he is just an amazing fighter to watch, and to see him grow and to see him improve all the time. I know he's been training, spent some time in Newcastle. He was training with Kyle Noak and the guys at Brotherhood MMA, and I'm very, very excited to see him next weekend in Brizzy. And as I say, it's a stacked card. Plenty of Aussies there representing. Beck Rawlings on the card. As I say, Richie Walsh, Dan Kelly, and just some great fights. Tickets are still available from ticketek.com.au. If you're interested, if you're in Australia, particularly in Brisbane, and you've never seen a live UFC event, get along next weekend because you're in for a treat. It is such a great thing to experience and to be a part of, and you really won't regret it. It's well worth the price of admission. So with that being said, that brings us to the end of the first ever edition of the Big Bad Brad Show MMA. Thank you so much for listening. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Big Bad Brad MMA. We're also on Twitter at Big Bad Brad MMA. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hopefully I can keep the shows coming, and hopefully you guys keep enjoying it. Thanks so much, and I will catch you next time.